It was one of those nights where the road seemed endless, blacktop stretching infinitely into the darkness. The only illumination came from the headlights of my truck, cutting through the blackness ahead. The dashboard clock read 11:45 p.m., and exhaustion had begun to weigh heavily on my eyelids. All I needed was a place to pull over and rest for just a few minutes. A brief respite before continuing down that lonely road. A few miles later, I spotted a sign. A rest area was just ahead. It wasn't one of those fancy stops with visitor centers and vending machines, but it would do. Talks End, it read, some obscure place up north. I took the exit, my truck rolling into the empty parking lot, a silence enveloping the area. No other vehicles, no other souls. Just me and the stillness of the night. I parked in the far corner of the lot, near the shadowy outline of an old outhouse and a few picnic tables. As I killed the engine, the headlights flickered out, plunging me into near total darkness. Only a dim street lamp provided any light, casting weak, flickering shadows that barely reached where my truck was parked. Fatigue washed over me, and I reclined my seat, hoping for a few hours of sleep before I hit the road again. The silence was comforting at first, a lullaby to coax me into slumber. But just as my eyes were beginning to close, I heard something. First, it was faint, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. A soft whisper carried on the wind just outside the truck. I opened my eyes and strained to listen. The sound had vanished. I shook my head, dismissing it as the product of an overtired mind. But then it came again, this time louder, clearer. The whispering grew more distinct, no longer just a murmur, but something more insidious, more deliberate. It was like someone was muttering to themselves, angry, unintelligible words spoken in a low, menacing tone. My heart began to race, a cold sweat forming on my brow. I sat up, fully awake now, and peered out into the darkness. The lot was still empty. Picnic tables and outhouse just silent silhouettes, but the whispering continued, growing louder, closer. The words were garbled, nonsensical, but filled with a malevolent energy that sent shivers down my spine. Instinctively, I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling, but something deep inside me screamed not to get out of the truck. Primal fear rooted me in place, telling me that whatever was out there, it was dangerous. The whispering was right outside now, just by the driver's side door. My breath hitched, and slowly I turned my head toward the window. And that's when I saw him. Face, pale, twisted, was pressed against the glass, staring right at me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a malevolent glee. His mouth was stretched into a grin that chilled me to the core. And in his hand he held a long, jagged knife, the blade glinting faintly in the dim light. For a moment I was paralyzed, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Was this real? A nightmare? But the man outside didn't wait for me to figure it out. He raised the knife, tapping it against the glass. The sound, sharp and deliberate, sent jolts of terror through my veins. His grin widened, and though I couldn't hear his words over the pounding of my heart, I could see his lips moving, forming silent threats. Panic finally shattered the paralysis that had gripped me. My hands fumbled with the keys, shaking as I jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, but the man didn't flinch. He just stood there, grinning, tapping that knife in a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed in my mind. With a desperate jolt, I slammed the truck into gear and tore out of the rest area, tires screeching against the cold asphalt. My heart raced as I sped down the desolate highway, adrenaline surging through me. But even miles away, I couldn't escape the haunting image of his face, those cold, dead eyes, and that knife glinting in the darkness. The whispers lingered in my ears like a bad dream, a memory I couldn't shake. Every few seconds, my eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following, that twisted grin reflected in the shadows behind me. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a truck stop in the distance that I began to breathe again. I pulled in under the safety of those bright lights and let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But sleep, it never came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing there, grinning, that knife gleaming in his hand. To this day, I avoid lonely rest areas, those places where the darkness feels alive, waiting. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I do know this. If I hadn't gotten out when I did, I might not be here to tell the tale. The road can be a lonely place, but it's what hides in the shadows that truly terrify.